Hi, welcome back to Spring CS170. We're going to record a module for today to cover the weekly pay. So what I've done here is just put into the sample HTML that we've been working with. Again, I'm going to provide it to you after I'm done with these last couple of lectures. I just started off here, which is essentially all the stuff that you see here. Okay, and then you'll see there's a next couple of steps here where you'll be able to refine this and change this, but this will kind of cover a couple of different concepts. So again, you should be able to take this and then convert it to the other bits so that you can keep as part of your examples to help on your assignments, as well as hopefully help you also for your exam. Okay, so this is what we did here. And then I'll talk you through these concepts that I've done. I just kind of tacked this on to the end of like the other code that we were doing before. Normally you wouldn't do it this way, right? But it's good to have it all in one file for you to look at later on. Okay, so first things first, you see the var and hours, which is fine, right? This is what you're used to. We're declaring these variables, and then we have to initialize. But you notice what we did here. We have the var equals to 1 times the prompt hours worked. So there's two things here that we haven't covered yet. Prompt, right? That's to exactly what it says, prompt, right? So that you can type something in. Now, remember these are numbers, and so that's why you use this 1 times here, right? So 1 times this is essentially kind of setting it to be understood to be a number, right? So you remember we were doing like the number with the open paren and closed paren and two fixed. This kind of works in a similar type of manner by saying the 1 times the prompt, right? And then the pay rate is the same thing. So 1 times the prompt for pay rate, pay per hour. And then we did the total pay. I initialized it to 0, right? Here they just kind of declared it to be total pay, but I decided to initialize it to 0. And then here, I think we haven't gone over this yet in class, is the idea of an if statement, right? So there's an if, and then there's an else. Now we did cover this in pseudocode, right? So if you remember on the pseudocode, we talked about if else. So this is matching to that, right? And same thing when we talked about with the pseudocode, we could do nesting. We can do a nesting of if statements in here also. Right, but for now, we just have a simple thing to say whether you work less than 40 hours or you work more than 40 hours. If you work more than 40 hours, you're going to get 1.5 times the pay rate on top of that, so your overtime, right? And I should be actually more specific, right? It's either greater than 40 hours or less than or equal to 40 hours. Those are your two options here. So if it's less than or equal to 40, then you have this, okay? Which is just your total pay hours times pay rate. Now, if I wanted to be a little bit more sophisticated on checking the errors or whatnot, you could be checking, well, can I put in negative hours, right? Like negative hours probably doesn't make sense, right? So should I check for a negative number? But just for the purpose of this exercise, we're just gonna assume that it's like greater than 0, and you can put in these hours, right? And of course, there's only so many hours in a day or a week, so there's probably a ceiling for how big the number can be also. But that's for like a bonus or extra thing, right? Don't have to do it, but something you might want to consider. Essentially, error handling. Okay, and then you have the alert, which I think is also, I think I've covered it before, right? So alert is basically a pop-up to say your total pay is, and then here's your variable total pay, right? And you see what happened here? When I double clicked on it, you can see it highlights it here, right? So sometimes if you're expecting like, oh, here's my declaration, here's my calculation, and here's the output, if all of a sudden one of those things is missing, right? Let's say I clicked on this, that means you maybe had a typo. Maybe I put in like total pay all lowercase or something like that. So again, a nice little tip to kind of point out if you made an error or something, right? So again, if I do this, this kind of tells me all the instances of that variable being used throughout your code, okay? And sometimes it's a little misspelling like that that causes your program not to function well, okay? So anyway, that's the basic logic. So remember this new concept here for input. Here's your prompt. Here's your if-else statement, doing your calculation based on these two inputs, and then your alert to show what came out the other side of that calculation. Okay, so that's your weekly pay calculation. And this is like kind of like a quick and dirty way of putting together your input, your calculation, and then your output. Here's the next step. Well, the next step would be to convert this to a function, right? So I can kind of call this anytime, wherever in the code, or it could be in another HTML page if you set this up correctly, right? So then you have this, right? You know what the declaration is, right? Here's the function, right? Here's the name of the function. Here's like the input parameters for the function. Then all of this is the same, right? Here's the logic, right? But instead of doing an alert box to print it out, you're going to do a return of the total pay. Okay, so I'm not going to implement this. I'm going to leave this for you. Obviously, this is all written out here, so you can try that. Okay, and it'll feed eventually into this thing here. You see at the bottom this gray box here. Okay, so instead of using like the prompt to calculate the input, you'll see the text boxes, which we demoed for like the last couple of videos, how to use text boxes to capture your information, right? And then of course you'll be calling a function, right, to call the pay calculation, and then you'll return the total pay, right? So how are you going to do that? Well, you're going to have a button here, right? You see this button, calculate pay. When you hit that button, then you're going to call this function here, and then you'll be able to display it. Maybe you do an alert box, or you see this total pay text box here. You'll put it into this total pay text box. Okay, so you can see how we started off with the basic, quick, and dirty, how we're stepping up to the next level, ideally how you want to implement this in a proper way. Then you go to the next one here. This is basically what we've done for the last couple of examples where you're setting the style, right, up in the header, right? So here's the head, here's the style, and you know, basically the same stuff, right? You can see a font size, color, background color, your body, your input, your button, stuff like that, right? So you have examples of that already. And then here's your text box, right? So we created an hours box, a pay box, and your total pay box, right? And look at the read only over here. Note the / over here too. Don't forget that. So yeah, so that's what you have here, okay? And let me see here. Oh, and then you have your button, right? You have this button on click, right? But notice there's no code in here, right? So you can see the button, there's the ID, right? And then you have on click, and then you have a blank in here, and then you have calculate pay, which shows up here, calculate pay at the bottom. That's the label, not the label, the display on the button, okay? So what do you imagine will be this on click? Well, you're going to probably take the information that you pulled up here with the hours box and the pay box, pass those as arguments into your function, right? Up here, you're going to pass it into this function here, pay, hours, and pay rate, and you're going to return the total pay. Once you return that into here, then you're going to assign it to this total pay box, right? So the value of this total pay box equals to the value that you return from that function. So try and do that on your own in the on click here, okay? So that's what this is asking, right? The weekly, the button, what goes in the code, okay? So I'm gonna wrap this up. This should be a quick video here, so work off of this. Again, I'm gonna provide the HTML shortly. I just have to record one more video for the coin toss, and then we'll be good for this week. All right, thank you.